So we're about to kick off. Is everybody ready? Are you guys ready? Contestants, a reminder, your time starts from your very first word, and you'll get a friendly wave from Liz to let you know that you have 30 seconds remaining, and then a less friendly, loud, honking noise if you go over time. So let's begin, shall we? Our first speaker is Chris Lally. Chris is a PhD student at Curram, NUI Galway. He studied neuroscience and biotech. He's also spent some time in the biopharma industry, making chronic pain medicine for not humans, but cats and dogs. Pause for effect. Oh, you got it. Well done, you. Pause for effect. Medicine. Brilliant. I was concerned you wouldn't, for goodness sake. It does take a long time to make these puns, and I was worried it was going to be a long night. Chris, did you get it? Chris, if I were you, I'd beagle lad that you were going first. Ladies and germs, please put your hands together for our first FameLab finalist, Chris Lally!
So, ladies and gentlemen, we live in the antibiotic age. Antibiotics have defined our sense of what modern medicine should look like. Without antibiotics, most of modern surgery would be unthinkable. No more hip replacements, no more heart transplants, no more cesarean sections. Without antibiotics, 3 out of 10 children would still die from pneumonia. Without antibiotics, a cat scratch or a paper cut could still end in an amputation. So there's a problem. Every time we use antibiotics, there's a risk that a small number of bacteria will survive due to chance mutations that make them resistant. Those resistant bacteria have a survival advantage over their non-resistant competition. So the non-resistant bacteria die out, the resistant bacteria survive, and then the antibiotics become useless. So we try and stay one step ahead by inventing new antibiotics that work differently. But this, on average, takes 30 years and costs over $1 billion. For example, daptomycin was the first new antibiotic to come out for 20 years when it was released in 2003. By 2004, resistance had been reported. So this is an arms race we can't win. The antibiotic age is ending. And unless we can find a sustainable solution, 10 million people will die by 2050. But the solution might come in the form of a forgotten Soviet technology that was invented over 100 years ago. In 1917, microbiologist Felix Darel discovered a class of viruses called bacteriophages, bacteria eaters. And he discovered that these work by infecting bacteria. They latch on and they inject their genetic material that then hijacks the bacteria to produce hundreds more phages. So the cell explodes, these go forth and multiply until the entire infection is wiped out. And because they only target bacteria, they're totally safe to use in humans. So Darel saw their therapeutic potential immediately. He set up phage therapy clinics in France, Poland, and Soviet Georgia. But the medical community were skeptical, and when penicillin was released in the 1940s, a lot of the market for phage therapy simply evaporated in the West. But in the USSR, phage therapy was successfully used for decades. Bacteriophages became the Red Army's secret weapon to fight infection on the battlefield, being used to clear infections from war wounds. And since the fall of the Cold War, Western scientists have had access to a century of success stories using bacteriophage therapy. So, ladies and gentlemen, while the antibiotic era is ending, we're now ready, this time, to hear about bacteriophage therapy. We're out of the antibiotic age, and we're into the age of the phage. Thanks very much, guys.
Chris Lally, everyone!
I'll babysit that guy.
Did you make this yourself?
I had a little bit of help, but mostly.
Beautiful, beautiful.
That
Judges.
doesn't disqualify me, does it?
No, yeah, I think it's extra points. Graham.
Chris, well done. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So the virus consumes the bacteria,
Yeah.
but are there any harms to the host from having lots of virus floating around their systems?
You see, the thing is, the interesting part is these are already in your system. They're the most common entity on Earth. They reckon that there's maybe 5 billion of them in every teaspoonful of water. So there's something that are in us already. However, the reason why doctors were skeptical when they came out first was that this was being made in the 1920s, and they didn't know about things like bacterial endotoxins and different things that they didn't know how to prepare good injectable therapies. So when they were injected into people, they had these huge kind of allergic reactions, but that wasn't because of the phages. So there's reasons to be concerned about the technology, but we have a lot of those addressed now.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone? Any other questions from our judges?
Just a comment I would make.
Sure.
I love the way you sort of wove the history into. You're quite a good storyteller when it comes to
thank
history
you.
and things like that. So just a comment.
Chris Lally, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Chris. Our second speaker is Kate Finucane. Kate is currently in her third year studying astrophysics at Trinity College Dublin. She really enjoys public speaking, especially when she gets the opportunity to talk about something she is passionate about. Speaking of which, her hobbies include space, thinking about space, talking about space to anyone who will listen. Will Kate eclipse our other contestants? Please, a super massive round of applause for Kate Finucane!
For centuries, the beam of a lighthouse has guided ships safely to their destination. But what if I told you that instead of sailing ships being guided to port, there are lighthouses that could guide alien ships directly to Earth? It sounds a little bit science fiction, but it's more likely than you'd think. Far out in the cosmos, there are these things called pulsar stars. After a giant supernova explosion, these stars remain incredibly dense. These are so dense that 1 teaspoon of this star's material weighs the same as every single person on Earth twice. Now, these dense stars are spinning hundreds of times per second, and as they spin, from the axis comes out jets of radio waves, just like a lighthouse. Now, in the 60s, in Cambridge, there was a radio telescope reading that looked like this, just a blip and a blip and a blip. And these blips were so regular, we didn't know where they came from. We thought that they might have been made by intelligent life. And so they were called the LGM signal, for little green men. Now, to understand where these came from, we'll go back to the lighthouse. So, our jets are coming out of our star that's spinning hundreds of times per second. If Earth happens to be in the beam of these jets, then we register a blip. And as they spin, we register more blips, getting that incredibly regular signal. It's so regular that we can actually time our clocks off of it. And in fact, there are pulsar clocks, and there's one in a church in Poland, for example. Now, where does the map come into this? So, we have made a map from these pulsar stars because every one spins with a characteristic frequency, meaning that if you know what the signal is, you know exactly which star it came from. So, we made a map that shows exactly where Earth is with respect to 14 of these pulsar stars. If you knew even a handful of these signals, you could find your way directly to Earth. So what did we do? We stuck this map onto the classic, the iconic Pioneer plaque, and we sent it out into space twice, on Pioneer 10 and 11, the space probes sent out in the 70s. These space probes are currently some of the farthest man-made objects from Earth. They're currently hurtling their way and will eventually leave the solar system and go on out into space. So what happens if somebody finds these plaques, I wonder? Well, we may someday find out. Thank you.
Kate Finucane, everyone. Questions from our judges?
Well done. You spoke with such passion about the subject. I'm curious, how did you get interested in this?
Well, the original signals were discovered by a lady called Jocelyn Bell Burnell in the 60s. She's an Irish scientist. She's from Northern Ireland. And she found them. She did a lot of research into them initially, and then she didn't get a Nobel Prize for it. Her PhD supervisor and another researcher got it. Now she's gone on to do some great things since then, but it kind of stuck with me. She's my, I guess, science hero, I think, on the profiles that are in all of the profiles there.
I always cite her when I'm asked who my idol is when it comes to
Yeah,
STEM.
she's a wonderful woman.
Incredible. Really interesting around, I loved that it involved the pulsar story, and I did wonder the same thing. Were you inspired by
I
Bell
really
Burnell?
was.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the judges?
Do you have any plans to pursue this or other versions of this at postgraduate level?
That would be wonderful. I'm currently in my third year, so it's still, thankfully, slightly further away before I have to make that decision, but it would certainly be an area of interest to me, yeah.
And who came up with the LGM acronym, by the way, just a matter of interest?
I think it was just the kind of team at the time. They had no idea what it was, and they thought it was so regular, it must have been intelligent beings that sent it.
And hence they called it Little Green Men.
Little green men, exactly.
Kate Finucane, everyone. Thanks, Kate. Our next speaker is Simone Iodanza. He graduated from Politecnico di Milano, Italia in 2016, after which he enrolled in a PhD in nanophotonics at CIT in Tyndall. His research interests are varied and include optoelectronics, nanofabrication, photonic crystals, silicon photonics, and semiconductor laser dynamics, all of which means he just really, really, really likes lasers. It might be a surprise then to learn that Simone's talk is about mandrels. Just kidding, it's about lasers. Light-hearted topic coming up next. It's Simone Iodanza. Simone!
One million. These are the new Google searches by the time I finish this sentence. And this is just one web engine. Multiply this by every website, satellite, PC, sensor. The amount of data we upload to the internet fills 30 hard drives every second, and it grows faster and faster. In fact, we created more data in the last 2 years than in all the rest of human history. 4 zettabytes. That's a 4 followed by 21 zeros, which is equivalent to Ed Sheeran's Galway Girl playing non-stop on YouTube for 1 billion years. And all of this data is converted into light by our computers and then travels freely into the magical world of optical fibers until it's converted back into electricity to be processed by each of the hundreds of nodes of the network. In each of these conversions, half of the energy is lost to resistive heating, gone. And more data means a higher frequency of operation, which means more and more electricity. Up to a point, the processor becomes so hot, they melt. We could avoid this by direct processing of light, but we need to trap it in really small places, and it's too fast for us. It would be like catching a bullet with our bare hands, only 500,000 times faster. So, is the future then? Year 2025, digital information apocalypse. Internet shuts down. Food stores that rely totally on it to manage supplies run out empty in a month. Everyone is on his own, since long-range communication is out. And all flights are grounded. Gridlocks everywhere as the traffic light go crazy. There's unrest in the streets. It's panic, violence, and flames. Was the shouting madman in the street right? Is it the end? No. And that's because of butterflies. Their wings are covered with tiny holes and pillars. And these pillars and holes interact so strongly with the light shining on them that the colors, some colors are trapped on them, and others are reflected according to the periodicity of the holes. And now, by engineering these holes, we can slow and even store light in them for the processing. And this is the, well, slow light effect. And here's how they look like under the microscope. And oh boy, they're small. In fact, this image is so scaled up that for comparison, this butterfly here would span the entire city. Here's the way to a new optical network that uses just beams of light to process our data, which is way faster and 100 times more energy efficient. Here's the way to avert the next decade digital apocalypse. Thank you.
Good job, Simone. Judges.
I'm curious, is the kind of the optical system you're talking about, is this something that's in the preserve of university labs only, or any of the companies? I would have thought this would be of great interest to them.
So there's a lot of companies involved in the R&D of these devices. There are nanophotonic devices. And for now, the results are mainly in research, but there's already basically, let's say, a study on the commercialization and to basically develop the next chip for these networks, for the nodes of the network. And slow light is an effect that is not well known, but has been done the first time in a Bose condensate, and they were able to slow light to the speed of a bicycle. On these nanophotonic devices, you can have a factor of 10 to 100, and then there is another research involved to go higher than that. But you can integrate it on computer chips.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, the butterfly, who is it that noticed this?
Sorry?
Who is it that saw that the butterfly had this? Is it something that was discovered years ago? Or?
Yeah, it was discovered years ago, and basically taking SEM images of the wings of the butterfly, you can see these kind of holes that and pillars and gratings that you repeat in space. And basically, the color that we see, this iridescent blue, is not a pigment. It's just light. All of the light that is shining on, and only the blue is reflected back. And that's why we get this very cool effect.
Where did you get the butterfly?
Amazon. And wait. It's dead, but Amazon swear that it died of natural causes.
Thank you.
Simone, your hands, everyone. So, 3 down, 7 to go. Our next speaker is Alina Ostrovska. Alina is a first-year biomedical science student in NUI Galway, majoring in biochemistry. She was awarded the All-Ireland Scholarship in 2014 and works as a piano teacher. I have a real good feeling about this one. A travel enthusiast and curious by nature, she thrives on making the uncomfortable comfortable. So sit back and relax and let Alina take you on a journey inside your body. Alina!
Our body is an incredibly complex system made up of over 37 trillion cells. To put that into perspective, there are 5,000 times more cells in your body than there are people on planet Earth. Let's think of the cell as a town, and the organelles or cellular components are the houses, factories, restaurants. They all serve a function, but over time they'll get worn down and will need to be demolished and replaced. This is what happens with your mitochondria, which is a complex organelle and the energy center of our cell. Mitochondria gets degraded and recycled by a process called autophagy, which is so called from the Greek words auto, for self, and phage, to eat, because autophagy is essentially your cell eating and recycling itself in order to survive. Oh, God. How does autophagy work? Sorry. So your proteins, a number of proteins have to interact, and a double membrane then forms. This double membrane approaches the target, so the mitochondria in our case, as if going in for a hug. But as it gets closer, it clasps shut and traps it inside a fluid-filled sac or vesicle called an autophagosome. This autophagosome then moves across the cellular fluid or cytoplasm to the lysosome, which is also a fluid-filled sac, but this time it's filled with acidic enzymes that will break down the proteins brick by brick. So the autophagosome will fuse with the lysosome, causing it and its contents to be degraded. This essentially is the cell's way of knocking down an old factory to make way for a new one. But getting rid of large complexes isn't all autophagy does. You see, autophagy allows us to survive starvation. Autophagosomes carry fats, proteins and organelles to the lysosome, which then degrades it. And the energy provided by this degradation allows us to continue to function, even in extended periods of time when we don't receive nutrients. As humans, we tend to try to stay away from hunger. And I mean, if we have 37 trillion cells, that's like 37 trillion mouths to feed. So no wonder we get hungry so often. But just bear in mind that we are evolutionarily equipped to withstand long periods of hunger. In fact, research counterintuitively but consistently shows that living on the edge of starvation may actually extend our lifespan. And autophagy may be the key to delaying the aging process and initiating internal rejuvenation. Thank you.
I learned a new word today. Autophagy.
Autophagy.
Autophagy?
Autophagosome.
Easy for you to say. Judges.
Just comment, well done. I like the way you made it real and talked about coming in for a hug as a good description. You brought it to life very nicely.
Thank you.
So, if I got the theory right, you could live longer if you can manipulate the autophagy process. Is that correct?
Yeah, guess what? Lots of people are already doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, are there any live experiments, not on people, but
People,
showing...
yes.
Sorry? At the autophagy level? Mm-hmm. By manipulation of diet, etc., is it? Really?
Yeah.
So where's this happening? I'm curious, where's this happening?
All around us. You might have heard of the fad called intermittent fasting.
I was going to say who told
That's
me.
you
Okay.
initiating the autophagy process. And actually, there have been studies on bacteria, worms, mice, yeast, and humans, and it's shown that life expectancy is extended, but we can't see the results for humans yet because obviously we're
Long
still alive
lifespans.
as it's all going on. But
Okay.
yeah, the intermittent fasting fad came about from that. And there was actually, I think there was a test of only 8 humans, but they went on an extreme fasting diet, and a fasting mimicking diet was also created. And these, they experienced a reduction in the size of their organs by about half. And then once they started eating again, they went back to their normal size, normal weight, their livers regenerated.
What, if I may, what kind of duration of starvation will somebody go through to achieve this result? That's just a personal question.
Actually, yeah, no, but I mean, we're not going to the extremes of like reducing half your body size, but I mean, autophagy kicks in within 16 hours, so you just have to miss breakfast, basically. And people do this for, like, say, 3 days a week, but it doubles after 24 hours. And I'm not telling you all to starve yourselves. That's not the point. But the point is that your cells, literally, it's like refurbishing your house, you know?
Okay.
You know, kicking in that process.
3 days a week.
Don't take me on that.
Are they happy is the question.
They are, yeah.
There are diets like this. Is really.
But
I
it's-
haven't
but
heard
it's
the
not-
scientific
Michael Mosley
explanation
did one,
before.
yeah.
But
It's
it's not
a huge hipster thing in Silicon Valley. Seriously.
Is
Have
it, yeah?
But
fasting.
this is the
Oh.
scientific backing for it. Yoshinori Osumi won the Nobel Prize for autophagy work after 30 years of work, and that's why this fad came about, but like it has scientific backing.
Well-
Really interesting. I didn't know, so that's really interesting.
Thank you.
Very good. Alina Ostrovska, everyone. Thanks, Alina. Our next speaker is Sharon Omiwola. She is a medical student with a keen interest in science. She credits her father, a doctor, for inspiring her to pursue medicine. She has dedicated her spare time to volunteering in clinics, retirement homes, daycares, and homeless shelters. Surprising she has enough time to actually do any study. She strives to live a life of purpose and help others. And if you're feeling in need of a bit of stimulation, Sharon has just the thing. Her talk is entitled Willy Wonka and the Coffee Factory. So please make a latte noise for Sharon Omiwola.
Come with me and we'll be in a place of caffeinated coffee. Take a sip and you'll see. It's bitter, that is bitter. Let's talk about coffee. Raise your hand if you love coffee. Now raise your hand if you love tea more than coffee. Wrong answer, that was a test. You're supposed to say coffee. Statistics have shown that 3 in 5 people drink a cup of coffee to start their day. And Mr. Willy Wonka, a candy inventing genius, is one of those people. Check this. Wonka goes to Starbucks and overhears the person in front of him place an order. Can I get an iced half-calf ristretto, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4, palm, sugar-free, cinnamon, dolce, soy, skinny, latte, get all that? Nope, and neither did Wonka. So when it's Wonka's turn, he's gonna order a simple coffee because he's a simple lad. But just what is it that makes coffee man's best friend? What's the secret ingredient? Well, since you asked, inside of coffee is a stimulant called caffeine, which tricks your brain into thinking you're not tired. So when your brain says sleep, caffeine says no. You see, our bodies produce a chemical called adenosine, which binds to receptors in the brain and slows down brain activity, thus making us feel sleepy. But due to having a similar structure, when caffeine is in town, it impersonates adenosine and binds to the receptor instead. So instead of being calmed, your brain gets triggered, which causes the nerve cells to speed up. And your pituitary gland, which produces hormones, senses this, starts freaking out, and signals hormones left, right, and center to release adrenaline, the fight or flight response. On the count of 3, I need everyone to put their hands up and say, yeah! 1, 2, 3, yeah! That is exactly what adrenaline says. Adrenaline comes to spice up your life by making your pupils dilate, your heart beat faster, your blood pressure increase, and your blood vessels constrict. All these symptoms are indicators that you've been hit by, you've been struck by smooth adrenaline. Adrenaline also affects dopamine levels by preventing it from getting reabsorbed by the brain, which just means you'll feel good. The sun will be shining, the angels are singing, and you'll just feel so happy. Ironically, this is actually the same thing cocaine does, but not to the same extent. Question, will drinking coffee kill you? It's impossibly possible. The lethal dose of caffeine is 150 milligrams per kg of your body. So depending on your weight, disclaimer, don't try this at home, you would need to consume between 6 and 7 grams of caffeine, which would be like drinking 50 or more cups of coffee in a day, which is essentially impossible to do because your body can't take that. Ain't that right, Wonka? Wonka over here is still in his first cup. He's not going for the 50. On average, he drinks 1 to 3 cups a day. Keeps him feeling alert and energized. Without coffee, he'd feel anxious, grumpy, and turn into an Oompa Loompa. Oh, would you look at that? I gotta go. It's coffee time.
Sharon Amiwale. Judges.
Do you start your day with a coffee?
No. I'm more so on the simpler side, you know. I take a cup of water every morning.
Why did you pick this topic?
That's a very good question. So I just feel like coffee is just something that many people can relate to. A lot of people drink it in the world, and I just thought it might be good to tell people, okay, what goes on behind drinking coffee? What happens when I drink a cup of coffee? Why is it that I don't feel tired anymore? How is it that I can drink this during exam time and just be so hype all the time and feel ready for my exams? Yeah, so that's why.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment, I loved it, and I always love to see even the tiniest bit of audience participation. It really pulls people into what you're talking about, I think. So well done.
Thank you.
Sharon Amiwale, everyone. Nice job, Sharon. All right, 5 down, 5 to go. We're halfway through, if my maths is right. Yes, my maths is right. Dara Bradshaw's talk is a social curse needs a social cure. Dara, he's our next speaker. His research explores ways of supporting families of children whose fathers have been imprisoned. He is studying for his PhD at the Centre for Social Issues in the Psychology Department at the University of Limerick, and is a self-confessed Batman enthusiast. The wit of the Joker, the genius of the Riddler, the dress sense of the Scarecrow. Dara's got them all. Let's see if Dara can perform the superhero feat of winning over our judges. Dara Bradshaw, everyone.
I'd like you all to imagine that you've gone to the doctors. And instead of the normal questions surrounding your health, such as do you exercise, do you smoke, instead you were asked how many close friends you have. What groups are you a part of? How important are these groups to you? Now, these questions might seem out of context, but the truth is, the groups to which we belong are important predictors to our future health, more important than diet, exercise, smoking, or medication. You see, social isolation is a killer. It affects 1 in 5 of the population. It affects young and old, so we all know somebody who's been impacted. It's a gnawing chronic disease that increases the risk of depression, addiction. It raises your heart pressure, it lowers your immune system, and it gradually wears you down, ultimately contributing to a premature death. But there is hope. If you join just one group, you cut your risk of death in the next year in half. You see, we're social beings. We're born into families. We live in communities and we work and play in groups. And it is these groups that become part of our identification, our social identity. It's where I and me become us and we. And when we identify with a group, we adhere to the norms, values, and behaviors of that group. And when positive, these contribute to positive health-related behaviors. But more than that, our social groups are the basis for the giving and receiving of support and connection. They ground us in the world, giving us purpose, meaning, and control. And when we draw on these tangible and psychological resources, we strengthen our immune system and are more capable to tackle adversity, stress, and even illness. But there's a catch. The membership has to be meaningful. I had a friend who had a difficulty transitioning into college. Ruth lost connection to her old friends and she struggled to make new ones. The more isolated she got, the more she mistrusted and avoided others. She once spoke about being in a room full of people, but feeling utterly alone. And that's because the identification of the group wasn't meaningful. Had it have been meaningful, she could have been more able to cope with added stress and tackle major illness from the common colds to HIV. But so strong is the effect of our groups that we're now developing interventions such as choir singing for schizophrenia and postnatal depression, midnight running groups to support families affected by suicide. Which brings up the thought of the next time you're in the doctor's office, perhaps it's time the prescription book is opened to include membership cards to social activities such as bingo, youth clubs, running clubs, choir singing. And remember, join a group, cut your risk of death in the next year in half. Thank you very much.
Nicely done, Darren. Let's hear from our group of judges.
Very compelling. You really made me reflect on actually how limited the questions when you go to a doctor often are and how unfocused on maybe where we need to be. So well done.
Thank you.
I love that. Can you tell me what got you into the area of social science that you study?
The social groups and social identity is, well, I actually used to work in the community. I used to be a puppet maker. And what I used to do is I used to go into communities like Moyross in Limerick, and we used to have ways of trying to get the younger people to engage in the community and to bring Moyross is I don't know if you know Limerick. It's on the outskirts of Limerick, so they get very few opportunities to engage with Limerick itself. Even though they're synonymous with Limerick, they're very isolated. So the workshops I was doing as I was looking at identity and making of the puppets and bringing the puppets into street theatre and having the kids come into Limerick and parade and show who they are to the city that they're from. And from that, I got interested in the whole identity and performance, and I saw that there was a course in Limerick in UL specifically on identity and the psychology of identity and how, by tapping into our identity resource, we can actually support people. So I jumped ship.
Yeah, lovely. Good story.
Great.
You said puppet maker, right?
Yes.
But have you done some training on stage and in the delivery?
I'm usually in the background.
You're in the background.
I hide, basically. The essence of a puppet maker is to hide.
Okay. Well, your delivery was impressive.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Dara Bradshaw.
Thank you.
Our next talker is a first year entering FameLab for the first time, and she's talking about the first days of living things. So she's speaker number 7. She is Samantha Kalstrup. She is really excited about beginning her journey of communication science. She hopes that FameLab is just the beginning. She's an undergrad at UCC studying bees, not the flying things, biological, earth and environmental sciences. And she is a self-described ecologist. Her talk is about the origins of life and the early soup of molecules that bore all living things. So I'll leave you in Samantha's hands. She's a consummate professional. Samantha Kalstrup, everyone.
"4 billion years ago, the world was a hostile place. It was hot, it was still cooling down from being formed almost. It was mostly rock and water and lava, and it was completely devoid of life. But somewhere, in a certain time, in a certain place on this barren, desolate earth, something happened that caused the beginnings of what we know as life today. What is it about us that makes us living? What makes you different to the air, to a rock? You're made of cells. They're self-contained, reproducing. They create and use energy. They're alive. And what all cells have in common is two things, DNA and RNA. Think of the cell like a factory that creates, well, more cells. And DNA is the instructions which that cell follows. RNA is the workers and the materials. RNA is the process of life. And we know now from studying viruses that RNA can create DNA, which has led to the theory of an RNA world, that life on this earth began with the natural formation of RNA. But how do you form RNA? It doesn't just pop out of nowhere. RNA has ingredients, and those ingredients need to be assembled in the right time at the right place. Well, as for the place, there are areas of this early Earth which could have, if those ingredients were present, formed RNA. The deep oceans and shallow waters are both hot and turbulent enough to allow a polymerization process that would have created RNA if the ingredients were present. And as for where the ingredients came from, well, that's been a mystery boggling scientists for years, because RNA is made of organic molecules. Those organic molecules would have to have come from an inorganic source. Well, in fact, relatively recently, we found that these organic molecules can be found in an inorganic place. We found them in meteors. We've simulated the conditions of dust in outer space, and we found that these molecules can form just by being submitted to the cosmic rays. Now, this early Earth was not as nice as the Earth we have today. It was being constantly battered by meteors, which were being destroyed and spreading debris all over the Earth. And from there, it was only a matter of luck before that dust made it to the right time in the right place. So, the reason we have our planet as we know it, as unlikely and as diverse and as wonderful as life is on this planet, it exists only because we were given the gift of RNA, the gift of life itself.
Samantha Kalstrup, what have our judges got to say?
Question for you. I think if I understood you correctly, the notion of the organic molecules arriving via meteorite and that you could simulate it dust. Did I catch that correctly?
Yep.
How does that simulation work?
Yep, so that was a study done by NASA actually very recently in 2015. They simulated the conditions that dust in like protoplanetary disks would have been subjected to, so like a lot of radiation, that like outer space atmosphere, and found that if chemicals which we know are present in space dust are subject to those conditions, they can form all the components needed to create RNA.
Your first time doing a competition like this? Am I right?
It's secondary school, yeah.
No, well done. I was just going to say well done.
I'm just curious, again, what sparked your interest in the area?
I did like very much the bare bones of this theory, the RNA world theory in my course. But what really interests me about it is that it's very much still in the theoretical stages. Like it's quite a likely and widely accepted theory that that is how the components of RNA came to be in Earth. But it's not the only one, and it's still something we're figuring out. And like that study was only conducted in 2015, which is very recent. You know, this is the question of the origin of life, so it's quite a dramatic thing to still be coming out.
Well done. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Samantha Kalstrup. So our next speaker is Owen Murphy with a background in biotechnology. Owen jetted off to Canada before continuing his studies in leukemia research. He spent some time as a teacher and is no stranger to educating audiences. He is a science ambassador for NUI Galway as he undertakes his PhD in genetics. So pay attention, class, and give a little love to all 23 chromosomes that make up our 8th FameLab contestant tonight, Owen Murphy.
Los Angeles, 1968. As the sun beats down on a busy street, a woman steps off the curb to get to the other side. But all of a sudden, her body freezes. She's upset, angry, confused. And then her body begins to shake uncontrollably. A nearby police officer shouts, "How can you be so drunk this early in the day? Shame on you." But she wasn't drunk, and she shouldn't have felt shame. But what she was experiencing were the early symptoms of Huntington's disease, a progressive brain disorder which affects you emotionally, mentally, and physically. Most sufferers will experience symptoms in their 30s and 40s, and unfortunately, over time, these symptoms will lead to their death. Possibly worse is the fact that their children have a 50% chance of inheritance. But a moment can make a difference, and in that moment, the police officer would initiate a sequence of events which would ultimately lead us back here today. That moment on the street would be the beginning of an adventure. It would start with the foundation of the Huntington Disease Society by the woman's husband, but their daughter, Nancy Wexler, the real key character in the story, would spend the next 25 years hunting down the cause of this disease. The hunt would take her to a small fishing village in Venezuela where so many people had Huntington's disease that scientists were able to identify the cause of the disease as chromosome 4. Research went global, and scientists soon were able to identify the gene. But hope soon faded as the complexity of the disease exposed itself. This model represents the position of the Huntington gene on our DNA. The scientists found that we all have the green section, which is good, but those with the disease have the red section. This is bad. The red section carries additional information which was leading to the disease. So, where do we go from there? Why do we care about this? Well, we here in Ireland care, and we should care, because we are between 2 and 3 times likely to inherit this disease as anywhere in the developed world. So let's put some numbers on that. A busy Match and Crow Park full house this summer. Between 15 and 20 people in the crowd will either suffer from Huntington's disease or develop it in their lifetime, a disease with no cure or no treatment. So hope had faded until recently, when a new technology gave renewed hope. CRISPR, a gene editing technology which allows scientists, using a scissors as an enzyme, or an enzyme as a scissors I should say, to make cuts in specific locations on the DNA, changing the genetic information. Recently, a group in the USA used CRISPR to remove the Huntington gene in its entirety from diseased mice. Groundbreaking. But we believe we need the green section to work properly. So right now in NUI Galway, we're using CRISPR to target the red section alone. Keep the good, remove the bad, reverse the symptoms. Stephen Hawking once said that as scientists, we step on the shoulders of science, building on the work which has come before us. We now find ourselves in a moment which Nancy Wexler could only have dreamt of 50 years ago. We now find ourselves in a moment where CRISPR is giving hope where hope had faded. We now find ourselves in a moment where treatment for Huntington's disease may become a reality. Thank you.
Owen Murphy. Judges.
Did you say that people of Irish ethnic background are
Yes.
more likely,
Yes.
specifically Irish?
Yes, with Celtic origin.
Yeah,
I mean, the
that's-
story to Venezuela links to a Scottish adventurer, if you want to put it that way, who adventured through a village in Venezuela. And, maybe adventure is not the right word, but that was the effect.
Is it family show? Or?
Yeah, it's a true story. True story.
Great.
We have been here before with
Yes.
a much promised technology in genetics, molecular biology,
Yeah.
Bacteria, virus delivered mechanisms, etc. There's a lot of talk about CRISPR at the moment. Do you think it's going to happen this time?
I think so. I think, I suppose I'm telling one side of the story,
Yeah.
what we're trying to do. But the work that we spoke about in the US, actually, Silicon Republic put out an article from February of a group in Poland who are actually taking the CRISPR which we're using and maybe tweaking it a little bit. So they're advancing with it. So I think maybe what we're using CRISPR for now may possibly be a starting point. The technology itself now may not get us there, but as a building block to where the technology will go and how we, I suppose, maybe ethically control it and decide where we go with it, probably needs some work. But I think for now, as a tool, it's offering us something, I think, which is is gone, hasn't been here before.
Are there any trials? Is it at any level? Have there been?
Well, in Huntington's, these are with CRISPR.
Just more broadly with CRISPR.
Well, with CRISPR, I suppose it's that mice work at the moment, and that's why I suppose what we're trying to do, we work on brain cells.
Okay.
So whereas the group which was in the article from February, we're actually using a connective tissue, we actually have a model where we can use actual brain cells where the Huntington protein has its effect in the mutated form and in its normal form. So we kind of feel that having that model up and running, even though it's not in mouse models, it's actually maybe given a more real effect of, where you'd want to go next.
Okay, thanks.
Just a comment, I thought it was very effective the way you opened with the story, and you had lots of details that really brought that to life. Nicely done. Thanks.
Owen Murphy, everyone. I like the mention of Silicon Republic. Some people say that's being a lick, but I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. God, where's the time gone? We're almost there. Our ninth speaker is Maureen Williams. Her talk is called Protect the Parasites. Maureen hails from the center of the Sunshine State, Orlando, Florida, where she grew up in the water, she says. She found a new home working in Irish waters at Trinity College Dublin, and her PhD links aquatic ecology, parasitology, and zombies. She'd be right at home in News Talk. Prepare to savour the brains of our penultimate speaker. It is Maureen Williams.
I want to invite you all to join me in a rally to save the parasites. Now, I know this is a hard sell. Parasites have a bad reputation, and they need a really good publicist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story. We're going to have zombies. We're going to have a damsel in distress that's an endangered species, and it's going to take place in a somewhat faraway land. So I'd like to take you to Japan. I want you to imagine a beautiful Japanese forest, huge trees, green vegetation, and a babbling brook in the middle of all of it. In that babbling brook is where our story takes place, and we have three main characters. The first of which is the endangered Japanese trout. These are beautiful silverfish. Our second player is our common cricket. And our protagonist, if you will, is a nematomorph worm. They're known as horsehair worms because, shockingly, they look like horse hairs. The horsehair worm lives inside the cricket, but the worm has a problem. The worm needs to get into the water in order to live its life cycle out. I don't know about you, I have never seen a cricket go synchronized swimming, so the worm has to come up with a solution. The worm takes control of the cricket's brain, and it makes the cricket take an unfortunately short walk off a long pier into the brook. At which point, the worm explodes out, leaving our poor deceased cricket floating on the surface. The worm swims away, and the trout comes along to find an easy meal. These crickets make up 60% of the trout's diet. That's massive. Not only that, but hundreds of years of evolution have led us to the point where the trout get this food exactly when they need it the most. This beautiful system is also incredibly fragile. In a real true story, that forest in 1916 was totally logged. All of the trees were cut down. It took 30 years for the crickets to come back. It took 50 years for the parasites to come back, and the trout is still critically endangered. So I don't know about you, I think it's great to save the rhinos, it's great to save the manatee, it's great to save the panda. But I think it's time that the animals pulling the strings behind the scenes, doing the hard work, get their credit. It is time that we protect the parasites, and it's time that we then protect our ecosystems. I would like to thank you all very much. Sorry about that.
Brought some crowd support, I see, Maureen. Judges.
We're still recovering
How's your
from
heart,
the
Graham?
How many times did you draw that to get it right?
I actually had a lab mate draw it because I'm not great at drawing.
It's a very cute cricket.
It is, isn't it?
So the take over the brain mechanism?
Yes.
Would you like to describe how that works, please?
Okay, so in these species, it's a chemical reaction. They essentially alter the balance of hormones in the brain, and the cricket acts erratically and starts to be hydrophilic, so move towards the water, as opposed to its normal hydrophobia. There's other parasites that have more mechanistic manipulations that do similar things. So there's funguses that physically pull on muscles. There's, ones that control different chemicals. It's all sorts. Parasites are pretty complex.
And so, like, 50 years later, still struggling to get back after the logging. Is that the-
Exactly, yeah. 50 years.
Is there a forecast of how long it'll take to?
No, so this is the thing. It's pretty rare that we have a long-term data set like this. It's really hard to have had continual parasitic science for that long. Parasitology, it's a pretty ancient field in some ways, but also a pretty new one, just because a lot of times it's hard to track life cycles. So it's one of the few examples where we have this long-term data, and we know, which is exciting.
Your own background, is it ecology specifically, or is that a more recent, is that a PhD level? What was your...
Yes, so I'm doing my PhD on behavior-changing parasites in an Irish context. So I work on freshwater invertebrates here and how changing their behavior changes energy flow.
Well done on the props. You certainly changed that
Yes.
energy flow with that balloon.
Well, we're
Nicely
waiting.
done, thanks.
Ladies and Maureen Williams. Well done, Maureen. Here we are, we got one left. Ronaldo do Amaral is our final speaker. His talk is called To Genetics and Beyond. He's originally from Brazil, but we will not hold that against him. It was only when he came to Ireland that Ronaldo discovered his great passion for science communication, though. Ronaldo researches skin wounds at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, where he focuses on the regeneration of damaged tissues and organs. So will Ronaldo have this competition sewn up? He'll have to do a pretty good job. Ronaldo do Amaral!
Ladies and gentlemen, meet the brain. He is a yellow, sad, fat, diabetic lab mouse who will have a short life. He's like this because he has in his DNA a gene named agouti. But if his mother, who also has the agouti gene, is fed during her pregnancy on a diet rich in vitamin B12 and folic acid, which we can find in broccoli, for example, she gives birth to Pinky, a healthy lab mouse. But you see, Pinky's DNA, his genetics, didn't change. He still has the agouti gene. So why was he not born like brain anymore? The answer for this is on epigenetics, where epi means beyond, above. It works like this. Our DNA is the recipe to make ourselves, but there are some molecules capable of hiding parts of the DNA. It's like in those top secret documents where they cover in black parts of the information. The information is still there, you just cannot read it. So epigenetics is the mechanism that controls which parts of our DNA will be covered and which parts will be not. So in the end, what happened to Pinky? His agouti gene got covered, as if it didn't exist anymore. So he was born normal. And this was due to the epigenetic changes caused by his mother's diet. But you see, it's not only diet. There are other environmental factors that can also influence epigenetics and then can be passed to next generations. For example, fathers who start smoking before 15 years old, they get epigenetic changes that increase around 3 times the chances of their sons to develop asthma. And even if they had quit smoking 5 years before conception. Guys, this is mind-blowing. You see, we have been living on an era of genetic determinism in which was told us that our DNA dictates our biological fate. If we have this gene, you'll be like this. If you have that gene, you'll be like that. But now we are seeing through epigenetics, how the environment can actually hide some parts of the DNA while let others work normally. This is epic. This is epigenetics. In the end, we are going to genetics and beyond.
That stage was just 1 foot shorter. We would have lost you.
The last time I came back a little bit.
Judges, what do you think of Ronaldo? Not personally, I mean. You know. You love the guy.
Can I ask you, are these epigenetic things that cover the original DNA, are they also proteins?
No. In the majority of time, what happens is there are chemicals as methyl groups. Like methyl is a chemical part of molecules that can interact with DNA directly, covering it, or they can interact with some proteins that are called histones that actually enwrap the DNA, covering it even more. So more methyl donors, acetyl groups, some chemicals.
These chemicals that come along and cover, obscure a piece of the DNA, like the father smoking before the age of 15 example, do they come along at that point, sit on the DNA and just stay there then for the rest of time?
There is, you can change it. For example, there is an example that actually they get some mice addicted to cocaine, okay? And
love science.
And through using changes in the epigenetics, it was able to actually remove the addiction of cocaine. The mice were cured from cocaine addiction. So it's possible, again, through the environment, from drugs, for food as well, that you can change the epigenetics.
Okay.
Although these can be passed through next generations, as I said.
I love the idea of the redacted text as a way of explaining how that worked. That was very good for identifying with.
Is that it? Any
Great
more questions
delivery.
for Ronaldo?
Super. Yeah.
Ronaldo do Amaral, everyone. Very good. All right, well, that's everybody. We would like to ask our judges to retire to the pantry and throw buns at each other. So if you would like to take yourselves away for the next 15 minutes and deliberate, we'd love to hear your judgment in no more than 15 minutes' time, please. We are good to move on to our next piece, which is something I'm very excited about. We are joined by Matt Parker. He is a sound artist and internet enthusiast, and he will entertain you during our intermission. Please welcome Matt Parker.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, I'm Matt Parker. I'm based in London, and I'm an artist, as it says up there. That's my name. So I'm a sound artist, and I'm interested in the internet. What is the internet? Where is the internet? Is it kind of all around us? Is it kind of up in the cloud? How does the internet work? According to Simone, it's lights, photons. What are the infrastructures of the internet, though? Is the internet ethereal? Is it light? Is it something material? Is it something we can touch? Can we hear the internet? Can we see the internet? What does the internet sound like? So on your chairs when you arrived, you would have found a piece of paper titled the Internet Mapping Project. And it asked for you to draw a map of the internet and locate your home on it. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to fill this out. Hopefully you have. So I've been conducting this exercise since 2015, following on from work from an ecologist called Kevin Kelly. And the kind of results from it really is that people aren't really sure what the internet is, and they have different ways of interpreting how they situate themselves in the internet. And we are all situated in this thing, the internet. But I have found that there are kind of three particular approaches that people take when they sort of think of visualizing the internet. And the first one is a nodal relationship, which is very similar to, again, like what Simone was talking about, this sort of idea of nodes where we kind of have these kind of almost like lattice or mesh or web or net of different kind of points that connect to each other. The second idea is around service-based. So this is when someone sort of thinks more about their relationship to the internet being about products that they consume, so like Google, Reddit, Hotmail, and then that kind of feeds into something that gets a bit more confusing and ethereal in the form of adverts. And then we kind of get into full-blown paranoia. And this is when people like really sort of, I don't know what's going on here, but what I know is that there's a lot of porn on it. And so what I'm kind of especially interested in my work is the sort of like material infrastructure of the internet. So this is like the kind of the nuts and bolts of the thing. So I'm interested in those nodes really of the internet and where all our data gets stored and all our online activities are processed. And this is mostly done at places called data centers. And this is me doing some sound recording outside a massive data center in Iceland, which has got a huge Bitcoin mine in it. It stores financial data, and BMW do aerodynamic testing, like data testing for future cars there. So you could argue that a data center is sort of any facility that remotely connects computers to a kind of central hub of computers that stores information or processes information. And then when we begin to think about data centers as something and the internet as something that's on a like planetary scale, you can begin to think about how all of these kind of nodes, such as in that previous image, are kind of made up of these data centers that are networked across the planet, sorting and processing data from people like you and me, from small businesses, big businesses, governments, surveillance agencies, etc. So this is a sound recording that I did inside a data center. Data centers are pretty noisy places, and to keep all of this information running and moving, it takes a huge amount of energy to power it. Who owns these data centers? The really big data centers are owned, unsurprisingly, by companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Facebook, as this one is a picture from. And as we're live streaming on Facebook right now, I guess we're probably in live streaming right in one of the servers here right now, so we should give Facebook a wave in the live stream. So data centers, they're giant, energy-hungry warehouses. They don't really have any people in them, and they're kind of, I don't know, they're kind of inhospitable, even though they kind of look weird sci-fi with this sort of LED thing going on. But somehow, like, data centers are also kind of cool. They feature in episodes of US TV shows like Silicon Valley and Mr. Robot and House of Cards. In the Paris Fashion Week, Chanel decided to make data centers the main backdrop of the biggest show in the Paris Fashion Week of 2016. Even the companies themselves have kind of got in on the action. And in Dublin, Google commissioned Fuchsia McRae to make this mural on the data center, which is just an industrial warehouse. I don't know why anyone would care to look at it too much, other than that it is kind of a brutal building, but it is also in an industrial area, so it's kind of just like jumping on the bandwagon, I suppose. But you know, they're not all kind of glossy. Data centers are not just this sort of glossy thing that TV and fashion and design feature in. They also have a lot of problems too. So let's compare data centers to the aviation industry. So the aviation industry, it's one of the most highly regulated, criticized industries for its contribution to global climate change and carbon emissions. It's also a highly visible and audible industry. You know, planes are sort of rumbling across the sky every day, leaving vapor trails. We know it's there. The data center industry is equally concerning, really, as a carbon emitter, though. Forecasts estimate that the ICT industry globally is responsible for approximately 2% of global carbon emissions, which is actually about the same as the aviation industry as well. But who's really talking about it? So I'm interested in the impacts of this sort of global scale of data centers, but in my artwork, I'm also interested in the more kind of local community scale of data centers. So with a population of around 3,900, Athenry in County Galway has become the centre for a controversial data centre project. In 2015, Apple applied for planning permission to build 8 24,505 metre squared data centre buildings and all associated plant facilities, administrative buildings, and an individual 220 kilovolt power substation just for the centre itself. since that application was made, there's been a number of appeals made by local residents and also national residents against this proposed data center project. And the decisions are still kind of held up in the courts, although it's coming to a conclusion soon. And this situation is actually further complicated by the fact that other local action groups have been formed in support of Apple. And so this image isn't protesters against the data center, but it's people protesting against the protesters that are protesting against Apple in Athenry Town. For me as an artist, I've been working on a longitudinal study there since 2015, where I've been visiting the forest where they plan to build this data center, which is currently just a woodland forest where people go to walk their dogs or get a bit of fresh air. And I'm recording in various sites there with a kind of view to, in the long term, be able to trace the change in the sonic environment of this space, from the kind of nature bird sounds to the eventual data center sound that you heard earlier. So data centers, they can be noisy places with hundreds of fans and server racks whirring powerfully 24 hours a day. And I'd like to end this presentation by thinking about the connections between the future fans of Apple in the Derry-Donald Forest and a different type of fan, which is the fans of Irish football, with this short video that introduces a multimedia art installation that I've made called Fields of Athenry.
That's it, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, oh, good timing. Good timing. It looks like our judges have returned. Well done, Liz. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So what have I got here? I have the winners. Welcome back, our judges, everyone. How it was easy, was it?
No.
Certainly not.
No, it wasn't.
Definitely
A
not.
bit of argument.
Was it
going on
unanimous?
upstairs.
Oh, in the end.
In the end,
In the
yes.
end, okay,
Yes.
a bit of finagling. Right, okay.
They're convincing each other. Yeah.
Very good, very good. Listen, congratulations to all of our contestants tonight. Big round of applause for them, please. But without any further ado, I will announce our winners this evening. The audience prize goes to Ronaldo do Amaral. Well done, Ronaldo. Stay on stage, please, if you don't mind. Third prize goes to Owen Murphy. Well done, Owen. This is for you. I'll hand it back to you. So that. Pick your own prize. Second prize goes to Dara Bradshaw. Well done, Dara. And tonight's FameLab Ireland national winner who will go on to represent Ireland in Cheltenham as well as take home a €1,500 cash prize is... What time is it, by the way? Sharon Namiwale! Do we have a microphone? Stick microphone? Uh-huh. Thank you, Andy. Sharon, how do you feel?
Wow, this is amazing.
Would you like to say something, or have you just not thought of anything because you didn't know you were going to win until just now, and now it's kind of awkward?
Yes, I would love to say something.
Oh,
This
okay.
feels like I've just won a Grammy. I would like to thank my beautiful friends for supporting me, the audience for laughing at my jokes, the amazing people I got to meet through FameLab. And I know you're not supposed to judge people, but the judges for judging. And I'd also like to thank my family back home, especially my parents. Thank you very much.
Nicely done. Oh, yeah, you got the right. Graham would like to say a few words, Sharon?
If I can just mention, actually, so congratulations to all the winners. Well done. And we had a bit of a torrid time upstairs working through some of it because of the rankings, etc. But we wanted to say one thing. Particularly around third and fourth, so an honourable mention particularly to Samantha Calthrop as well, please. We want to really make a point of that. The RNA, etc. That was superb. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Graham.
Can I just say
Yes,
one
sure,
thing as well?
yeah.
One thing we all said as well, the standard was absolutely amazing, and really sorry that we couldn't give you all prizes. You were incredible. So well done, everybody.
Thank you. I believe we have a grand prize for Sharon. So one more round of applause, please, for our winner, Sharon Omawale. I'm really looking forward to accompanying Sharon. So I go over on Future Proof. We accompany the winner and we follow your story as you go and take part in the semi-final and the international final, hopefully, and represent Ireland. That was a fantastic performance. You had obviously rehearsed that to death, had you? Yes. Every single second was perfect from start to finish. So really looking forward to seeing how you do in FameLab. Congratulations. And once again, thanks to all of our finalists. Thank you to the British Council, of course, who run this fantastic competition. Thanks to Science Foundation Ireland, who support us, as well as CPL and Henkel and all of our partners here. There's a lot of people behind the scenes that you don't get to see, including Liz McBain from the British Council and Amy Herron and everybody else. So big round of applause for everybody. Thank you and good night.